Have you ever wanted to draft for the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the Indigo Disk DLC, but don't know where to start? Well, this is a series for you guys. What's going on, everybody? You have Tone here, back with our third installment of how to draft in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the Indigo Disk, the series where I'll be drafting teams around various cores and breaking down roles and rules that I'll be following. If you guys missed the previous episode on my channel, there will be a link in the top right hand corner where I went pretty in depth with my core of Iron Valiant, Goldango, and Gliscor. This time around though, after taking you guys' feedback into consideration, I decided to go a little bit of the extra mile just to clarify on a few other things that I didn't really go in depth about in terms of certain Pokemon roles. So with that being said, the main thing I will be talking about before I get into the draft is value picks and Tera captains. The last one I really neglected to really touch on, basically because I didn't want the Tera rules to play into any factor when it came to me putting the teams together. But just to give some clarification on what to look for when it comes to Tera captains, I'll also be talking about value picks to go along with the Tera captains. So first off, we'll talk about value picks for a bit. So basically what a value pick is, it essentially is a Pokemon that can perform a similar role to Pokemon that are priced in a higher tier than it. So basically it means that you can get some good value for this Pokemon while having to shell out so many points, and you can save your points for other more important roles for your team. Some examples that I will talk about when it comes to value picks. First two that I want to touch on a bit, what I did include in the first episode, which was Gastrodon. Gastrodon is a very good example of a value pick because of the fact that it provides your team with a bulky water. It's an electric immunity with it being water and ground type. It only has one weakness in grass. It provides your team with Stealth Rock, it gives you a Spiker, and on top of that it has reliable recovery. So you get a lot of value for Gastrodon in that one Pokemon, and for a relatively good price in a point strat format, especially considering if you guys are using the SBL tiers as your basis. Another thing I touched on, Quagsire. Quagsire also fits in that mold because, again, like Gastrodon, bulky water, ground, electric immunity, both water ground typing, both have reliable recovery. The main added benefits of Quagsire over Gastrodon is, on top of having a water immunity with Gastrodon having Storm Drain, Quagsire having Water Absorb, Quagsire also has Unaware to dissuade and bypass any setup sweepers. Granted, there are some instances where Unaware is ignored in the instances of like Necrozma's Photon Geyser and Stored Power, which does not get unaffected. It's unaffected by Unaware since the boost does not matter. Another thing to take into account with Quagsire opposed to Gastrodon, it gets access to Toxic and Toxic Spikes. So you have pretty much every meaningful form of hazards right then and there in one Pokemon. While Quagsire isn't the best from a specially defensive standpoint, it still does work well for your team in the long run in terms of filling out a specific role compression for your team, and it's nice for the value that Quagsire does provide. Another Pokemon that I will touch on a bit, while it's a little bit lesser known, not really lesser known, but it's one of those Pokemon that don't really consider thinking about in a draft from a draft league perspective, is Cobalion. And I say Cobalion lightly, just because the typing is pretty doggone good in Steel and Fighting, but as an offensive Steel, let alone a Fighting type, people are turned off by Cobalion because it's really fast at base 108 speed. It has good defenses, but some people dislike it because of the fact that it has base 90 attack, but it has means of boosting its offensive with Swords Dance and Calm Mind and stuff. It also gives your team Stealth Rock, and more importantly, it also provides your team with Momentum and Volt Switch, as well as giving you other utility moves like Taunt. So while Cobalion isn't like the first thing that comes to mind, especially considering the typing and everything, Cobalion isn't really that bad of an option for a value pick, especially if you have means of making up for its low special defense on your draft. Another one of my other favorite Pokemon is Diancie. Diancie is fantastic as a value Pokemon, not only providing your team being a unique rock and fairy type Pokemon, granted there's Carbink, but Carbink wishes it had Diancie's offenses. And on top of that, Diancie is so ridiculously versatile for the value it brings for your team. Being able to be a Stealth Rocker, it can Spike, it can Calm Mind, it can Iron Defense Body Press, it can run Diamond Storm, it can do Trick Room. That's literally 6 things right there in one Pokemon. Your fairy type doesn't necessarily have to be the best thing like a Clefable, for an example, but Diancie, for the value that it provides you, it gives you so much value right then and there for your team, and it's a relatively cheap option compared to other more expensive fairy types. So if you want to hold back and get something like Diancie for your team that fills out so many roles for you, Diancie's a fantastic pick. Another Pokemon that I'm very high on when it comes to value, Electros. For a Pokemon that's pretty low tier from a point value perspective, being an Electro type Pokemon that does not have to rely on Terastallization to be effective is so doggone good. Even going into other Electro type Pokemon like Vikavolt. Electro type Pokemon that don't have to rely on Terastallization to be effective is so ridiculously good. And the other boon when it comes to having Electros or Vikavolt in that regard, slow momentum. While granted, Volt Switch from Vikavolt can be blocked, Electros can Volt Switch and U-turn. It can knock off, it has coverage for ground type Pokemon with Giga Drain, Flamethrower. Like, it has a lot of versatility for a low budget Electric type Pokemon. So if you want to get that Electric type Pokemon, but you don't really want to shell out so many points for like a Thundurus Styrian or whatever, Electros is a fine pick. Vikavolt is also a fine pick as well, because one thing that people do that some people can neglect with some of these mons is slow momentum. Having slow pivots is so ridiculously good just for the fact of just having to make sure your other Pokemon don't take damage unnecessarily. And just to go a little bit quicker with my examples here, Paldea Tauros Blaze is another option, basically considering it's a fire and fighting type. You don't have to shell out as many points for like an Infernape or whatever, or like a Blaziken, but more so the Blaziken depends on if speed boost is allowed in your draft league or not. But Paldea Tauros Blaze is fantastic, being a fire fighting type, good overall bulk and base 100 speed, so it has some good speed to it. Will-O-Wisp for more defensive sets. Intimidate is always good to weaken physical attackers, and it does have the ability to be like bulk up. It can do Trailblaze, it can be Choice Scarf. Like, it has a good versatility to it, and you don't really have to shout as many points like you have to do for like Infernape. Emboar also comes to mind in that regard. They're both good firefighting types, especially considering Emboar is like a good overall solid wall breaker. Like, granted, the speed is a little bit on the slow side, but when it comes to having offensive in a meta that's so offensive in nature, Emboar is really, really good, especially when you have the ability to pressure your opponent's defensive cores with like reckless flare blitzes and wild charges, and then having close combat for additional stab on top of that. That's some good value right there in Emboar. And just to go out some other Pokemon before I ramble on too long, Mesprit I already talked about in a previous episode about being a bulky Psychic type Pokemon that can Stealth Rock, U-turn for momentum, Nasty Plot, Calm Mind, Healing Wish for additional team support. That's an option. Florges is also an option. Granted, people may look a little bit down on Florges because it doesn't really have an ability per se, but being a good solid fairy type with a ability to pass decent amount of wishes, can heal up itself with synthesis, can calm mind, so it's not really a passive fairy type Pokemon, so there's that. And then for other options, there's also like Haxorus if you want like a more hard hitting dragon type Pokemon, not like a Roaring Moon or a Hydreigon. Haxorus does give you immediate wall breaking potential, priority with first impression. You can still Dragon Dance and Swords Dance and all that stuff, SD Scale Shot with loaded dice. You have that over like a Garchomp if you already have Hazard support. Goodra with the buffs that already got with Scald, Knockoff, good utility presence, Grass Immunity. So really good stuff right there. And even Dragalge as a last value mon there. Another slow, bulky pivot Grounded Poison, Toxic Spikes, Adaptability Draco Meteors and Sludge Bombs, Slow Momentum with Flip Turn, Toxic Spikes as I already mentioned, and even Toxic in general. So yeah, that's just a few examples of value picks that I have put on previous teams in the first 2 episodes, and hopefully I'll get to showcase a little bit more of those value picks with my teams. As for Tera Captains themselves, while I'm not going to go too much in depth with Tera Captains, normally the thing you would want to value in your Tera Captains it's a little bit two-folded, because Tera Captains can be used both offensively, and most people would just go straight for the offensive Tera option, like something that can boost its offensive potential. From a lower tier perspective, there are some examples, like say Galarian Articuno is one that does come to mind because it has the ability to boost its speed with agility. Even other like lower tier Quiver Dances, which are normally banned in this tier format, so stuff like Venomoth would be one of the main ones that comes to mind. Vivillon a little bit to a lesser extent. Frostmoth is another option. The SBL does have that Tera banned for obvious reasons, but if you guys want to unban it in your league and see how things go, then yeah, I won't stop you from having fun and doing what you want to do in your own draft league. But do keep in mind that, as I mentioned, that Tera Captains can be used offensively. That doesn't mean that defensive Pokemon cannot be Tera Captains themselves, because being able to reliably counteract your opponent's offensive pressure is pretty doggone important. While it's not the best example of a Tera Captain, the main example that I would use in my own personal experience was the time when a few leagues back before in the first DLC, when I had access to Tera Slowbro. While Tera Slowbro wasn't really the main thing I was thinking about in that basic tenet, Tera Slowbro surprised the absolute crap out of me. And came even more so than back when I had Tera Gyarados. I had Gyarados and Slowbro as my Tera Captains, and I relied more on Slowbro just for the ability that Slowbro can be function both offensively and maintain a defensive presence with the ability to terrestrialize. While in essence, like I said, that's not really much of a good example, considering that Slowbro is like 13 points or something like that in the SPL. Maybe a little bit higher, but for the most part, basically what I'm trying to get to as, don't rely solely on your Tera Captains being offensive in nature, just because of the fact that it's always nice to have a fallback option when it comes to having defensive ways to reliably be able to check your opponent's offensive threats. You don't have to be, the last thing you want to do is be reactive at every single instances to force speed, like bringing offensive mon over offensive mon. Unless you really want to be in that essence, then I won't stop you. But regardless, having good defensive counterplay to your opponent's draft is pretty crucial, just so you're not easily like overwhelmed or swept by an opponent's setup sweeper. So with that being said, I've already rambled on long enough with this value picks and Tera Captains regard, but basically when it comes to Tera Captains, especially I realized I spelled captains wrong. Anyway, regardless of that situation, now I lost my train of thought. Anyway, but basically what you want to do for a Tera Captain perspective is, normally Tera Captains, if you're using the low tier format, normally people will tend to go for their Tera Captains around like early on in the draft, like around mid round picks, basically like round 4, 5-ish. Is where you want to look to try to get your initial Tera Captain, or have an idea of what your Tera Captain might be with what you already have in your first few rounds of the draft, and then go from there. Other Tera Captain options are basically, it doesn't have to be setup sweepers in particular, they can also just be Pokemon that are just good and fast, relatively fast Pokemon that have the ability to hit hard with their stab. One example of that, Hisuian Electrode. That's basically one of the main ones. Base 150 speed, has good dual tabs typing electric and grass, and has the ability to Tera into an ice type to deal with dragons, fairy type to deal with dragons, and give yourself more defensive utility on top of that. So that's one example. Noivern, I believe, is another example. While it doesn't have the ability to boost its offenses, it's still a relatively fast Pokemon. Tera Flying, Stab Hurricanes, Tera Normal Boom Burst, stuff like that does come up. And defensively speaking, Tera Steel is not a bad option, just to be able to not be 4 times weak to ice, and you get rid of your fairy weakness as well. So yeah, those are just some decent examples. Also, there's also like offensive like ice type Pokemon to get rid of their bad typing defensively. So even stuff like Glastrier is one of those options. Like, it's not on the fast side, obviously, but the thing is, with Glastrier, it's so ridiculously bulky that bulk can be used to its advantages. So you're being defensively offensive, if that makes sense. So that is just some examples in that regard. So with that being said, on to the actual episode itself. This is going on a little bit longer than I expected. But regardless, I hope you guys are looking forward to the core for this episode. So this episode's core will be featuring 3 fantastic Pokemon. And those 3 Pokemon are going to be Great Tusk, Hisuian Samurott, and Zapdos. Yes, the Bane, not really the Bane, but having one of the best offensive threats to Grace Draft League format in Great Tusk, the best spiker a Draft League player can ask for that can do damage while setting up spikes in Hisuian Samurott, and one of the best rapid spin and physical punishers with static in Zapdos. So this is pretty much a balanced core I was going for, with having a good reliable Stealth Rocker and hazard removal, as well as knockoff support with Great Tusk. You have your Hisuian Samurott with Ceaseless Edges and boost in conjunction with Sharpness to boost that damage, get your layers of spikes up, be able to pressure stuff with reliably revenge stuff with Aqua Jet, Sucker Punch, Aqua Cutter for sharpness boosted stuff. Another way of getting rid of items, because this thing does get access to knockoff that people kind of tend to overlook. And then Zapdos does provide some good utility in conjunction with Great Tusk, as I already mentioned, being able to reliably check other physical attackers to ease the pressure off of Great Tusk to take on stuff like King Gambit, just to list an example. So with that, let's jump into the rules and roles like the last time. So first off, there is a little bit of a change to the rules and roles in this draft, but it still has the same three rules that I'll be following. First and foremost, Tera will not be playing a factor in how the making of this team. I want to take Terrestrialization out of the equation when it comes to putting the team together, as to not make up for any flaws the team may have. The order of the Pokemon doesn't mean to draft it in that round. This is basically just a precursor for how the team should relatively function in terms of looking for specific Pokemon in their roles. If you value a Pokemon earlier or later than other Pokemon, then I won't stop you. You can change it up however you like. Alternate options will be included at the end, like always, so you're not just stuck looking at the team and wondering if there's any alternative options to go for in this draft. Then, from there, select a balanced core. We already have that with our 3 Pokemon. Form a defensive core. Obviously, you basically just want to be able to have a way of dealing with your opponent's threats as best as possibly can, so being able to reliably have defensive mons to fall back on, so you're not overly just stuck in a proverbial loop against your opponent's offensive threats, is definitely a boon to have a sort of strong defensive core. And it is helpful with the fact that Great Tusk and Zapdos can be ran defensively pretty doggone well. And to a lesser extent, Hisuian Samurott, especially if you are like Pokemon and love your Assault Vest Hisuian Samurotts. But that's neither here nor there. Next up, 2 strong priority options. Technically, we already have 1 priority option. You do have the option to run Aqua Jet or Sucker Punch on Hisuian Samurott. We will be addressing a more priority to go along with that as the draft progresses. At least 2 Stealth Rockers. When you're running a team with Great Tusk, the one thing you do want to have is additional Stealth Rock support, so you're not stuck with running Great Tusk in a Stealth Rocking role and preventing it from being a lot more offensive in nature. and it's just really beneficial for your team as a whole, so your opponent isn't stuck trying to deal with your one stealth rocker. That's definitely not something you want your opponent to do, is basically key in on your main way of racking up stealth rock damage. Spikes and toxic spikes, luckily we already covered that with Hisuian Samurott, but just having the means of having additional hazard support with spikes and toxic spikes is definitely important to have, just to rack up all that extra damage as possible. One form of hazard remover, already have that with Great Tusk, so we're already off to a fantastic start here. We're not struggling to look for an immediate rapid spinner or removal in general. Defoggers could work, but it does seem counterintuitive to run defog in conjunction with stealth rock and spikes. You can still run it because there are going to be instances where you won't be able to bring your spiker in every single game you play, so having additional removal is a little bit more beneficial depending on how your team is drafted. 2 speed tiers above base 110. Now this is a little bit counterintuitive. I do mean to include base 110 Pokemon. I don't want to ignore them altogether. But basically the benchmark you want to do with this draft is have something above like Latios and Latias, basically is what I'm getting at. While it is beneficial to have defensive responses to Pokemon like them, having something that's naturally faster is also beneficial, just for the fact of being able to just pressure them a bit harder without having to rely solely on your defensive responses to check those certain threats. One wall breaker, granted, this team can function a little bit offensively. Great Tusk can definitely run like a more choice banded route if you do have the ability to free up the stealth rocking role and be a bit more counterintuitive and be a lot more offensive in nature with Great Tusk. To a lesser extent, Zapdos can definitely be run offensively as well. But for the most part, any hard-hitting Pokemon that can pressure your opponent's defensive core is basically what you're looking at when it comes to drafting a wall breaker. One ground immunity. We already have that in Zapdos, but it's always nice to have a ground immunity so you're not easily weak to earthquakes from Great Tusk, which luckily this team we already have that, but it's also like Excadrill, Landorus, Darien, and other hard-hitting ground-type Pokemon to take into account. One electric immunity, we have Great Tusk for that, so we already accomplished that, but regardless, having the ability to dissuade Volt Switch is always nice to have for any team, regardless if it's a ground type or a Pokemon with access to like Volt Absorb. One bulky water, Hisuian Samurott can be ran as a bulky water, as already been attested to from seeing Pokeaim using the PPL with running Rocky Helmet and Assault Vest Hisuian Samurott God knows how many times. But regardless, one bulky water is pretty nice to have because water is one of the best defensive typings to have in the game, and it just gives you the ability to be a bit more defensive while at the same time maintaining offensive potential, especially considering that water is also great offensively. One grounded poison type, you never want to automatically lose to your opponent setting up toxic spikes on your side of the field. Regardless, this team does have access to Great Tusk with Rapid Spin, but you don't want to really be caught running Rapid Spin Tusk and then having to come in and having to rapid spin away them while taking poison damage. So always having a grounded poison in the back is definitely crucial to absorb those toxic spikes. One knockoff user, Ion Disruption, is very, very crucial to have on your draft, just to get rid of heavy duty boots, get rid of life orbs, choice items, be as big of a nuisance as possible to your opponent's draft, and just mess up the strategy in general, especially if this helps in the long run, making the hazardous damage stick and rack up as the game progresses. The thing I did add here, one fast taunt, an encore user. This one is a bit more of, it's not really something that you think about usually when it comes to like fast taunting and encoring, stuff like that. That usually just comes along for the ride with the Pokemon. So for example, like Iron Valiant, you don't really think of Iron Valiant as, oh, I drafted this Pokemon because of Encore. That's the last thing that you would think about when it comes to Iron Valiant. You mostly think about it as a mixed wall breaker, as a versatile, hard-hitting attacker. Like moves like Taunt and Encore, stuff like that. You don't think about it, but it is nice because one of the things you don't want to do is to get overwhelmed by your team's by your opponent constantly coming in, setting up for free, and you don't have a reliable way of counteracting that. And then Fire, Water, Grass, Dragon, Steel, Fairy Core. Pretty crucial to have those types of Pokemon at your disposal, just because of the fact that they do perform well in a synergistic standpoint between those three typings. And one last thing I forgot to mention on this, that's not on here, is basically a ghost type. And the reasoning for the ghost type is, if you're going through all the trouble of getting up your Stealth Rock and your spikes and your toxic spikes, the last thing you want to do is have your opponent come in and just click rabbits in for free. So the best way to dissuade that, obviously, is to block Rapid Spin, and by that, having a ghost type would definitely be beneficial, especially in conjunction with all the hazards you want to look to try to rack up for your opponent's side of the field. So, with that out of the way, let's head on over to the team itself. Alright guys, so here we are with our draft for our core here of Great Tusk, Hisuian Samurott, and Zapdos, going in round 1, 2, and 3 respectively. Granted, obviously some Pokemon could be valued a little bit higher or lower depending, but I know for a fact some people really love Hisuian Samurott to the point that they will grab this thing round 2. Some people even late round 1. But regardless, in a team that has Great Tusk, normally you shouldn't pass on Great Tusk if there isn't a better option. Then Great Tusk usually is the best way to go for this team. And of course, we're just going under the assumption that Great Tusk, Hisuian Samurott, and Zapdos are all available to us and are not sniped. So, with that being said, let's just jump right into it. Once again, using the SPL tiers to make this draft. So once again, thank you to Shuckle King and PokeMND for letting me use their tiering system for this series. Regardless, jumping right into it, we've already used 49 points, and we have 71 points to work with to get 8 more Pokemon. Now, round 4, this seems a little bit controversial here, considering that I consider it to be a round 4 Pokemon. But granted, I think this Pokemon should easily be a top 3 round 3, like, a Pokemon to get in the first 3 rounds. But it's sort of fallen off once in certain leagues. I honestly don't know why. But regardless, round 4, I have Iron Moth. And basically the idea behind Iron Moth is the fact that you have a rock, you have your Stealth Rocker, you have your immediate spike with the Hisuian Samurott. You want something that can come in, take advantage of those hazards, and just really start to set up and win. Iron Moth is that Pokemon. While granted, it could easily have been Volcarona in this slot, and I could have used Volcarona here too. But the fact of the matter is, Iron Moth and Volcarona are pretty interchangeable as far as I'm concerned. Basically, Volcarona is 1 point cheaper, but Iron Moth does provide you with a bit more offensive pop. It does give you a grounded poison type as well. So you have your immediate grounded poison, so you're not worried about toxic spikes. It can set toxic spikes if you so choose to. And on top of that, it does have access to stuff like Fiery Dance to boost its special attack. It can still do boosted energy speed in conjunction with Fiery Dance, so it can essentially pop off like that. But if you opt for Volcarona, Volcarona would also work in tandem with this particular core. And it just helps with the fact that dealing with certain steel type Pokemon, it gives you an additional means for like Tusk that can struggle against Pokemon. It can struggle against Pokemon like Corviknight unless you're running like, I believe it gets Supercell Slam, I'm not entirely sure. But basically, it frees up the ability to run like specific coverage options for those Pokemon, and it gives you a way to set up on grass type Pokemon as well that can pressure, that can force out the Great Tusk and Hisuian Samurott to a degree without having to rely solely on Zapdos. So that's why I have Iron Moth here for round number 4. And now round number 5 and round number 6, it's a little bit of a tandem here. So round 5 and 6, I opted for a little bit something different with this team, and that difference is the fact that we're rocking both Tyranitar and Houndstone. So yeah, opted to go with a pseudo sand core for this build, and basically the reasoning behind that sort of build is basically with the physical presence you have between Great Tusk, Hisuian Samurott, and now with Tyranitar. Granted, it is double dark, but I will get to that in a second. you really want something that can take advantage of all the physical pressure you're putting on your opponent's team. Not taking into account Zapdos and Iron Moth, but one of the best cleaners you could ask for in going with a sort of weather core like this is to have something like Houndstone. And Houndstone's fantastic because of the fact of the main thing that prevents Houndstone from spamming its Ghost Stab, whether it be Poltergeist or Last Respects, if God knows that's allowed in your league, then I pray for your people. But anyway, the main reasoning for Houndstone, the dark and normal type Pokemon that are resistant or immune to Houndstone's Ghost Stab, well, guess what you have that round 1 that can deal with both dark and normal type Pokemon? You have a Great Tusk. So why not go Sand? Why not abuse the ability to get rid of and weaken the dark and normal type checks for Houndstone so we can freely not only spam Poltergeist, but do so under Sand principles and try to reliably late game sweep your opponent's team so you're not so reliant on Iron Moth being that main sweeper. So yeah, that's pretty much what I was going for here with the Sand Core. Just basically overwhelm your opponent's physical responses to your threats. Like, you have such physical offensive presence as it is, and then having Zapdos and Iron Moth in the fold as well, just to be a bit more of a nuisance to those physically defensive Pokemon that can come in on Great Tusk. It does work very, very well, and that's why I have the Sand thing going here. Another thing I will mention though, when it comes to a team like this, if for whatever reason, since I am doing Sand, if Great Tusk is not here, is not on the board, and you still want to use this team, and Excadrill is available, by all means, take Excadrill. Granted, the roles will be different, but both Excadrill and Great Tusk are both Stealth Rockers. They're both spinners. Granted, their checks will be a lot more different in nature because of their typing and their overall stats and everything, but it does provide you with a more Sand-oriented core to benefit from your team. The nice thing about Tusk is just the fact that it should be a bit more physically oriented and be a bit more defensive, while Excadrill, if you're running it with Sand, you may be more inclined to run a bit more offensively with Sand Rush, but since you have Sand Rush with Houndstone and Tyranitar, you're a little bit less so inclined to do so. So Houndstone can become more of the focal point of your sweep as opposed to being Excadrill, but granted, Excadrill can easily fit that role as well. And Houndstone's also just nice here because while we do have double dark types, we do want to have the ability to have another fighting resist that's not reliantly going into Zapdos and Iron Moth. We have an immunity, so that's also a nice thing to have in the back. So now, moving on to round number 7, I do have Bronzong on here, and I'm not gonna lie, guys, I had to double check, and I had to double check the tiering shift again. I was actually stifled by the fact that this thing was 6 points. I can understand the merit as to why it's 6, but 6 is still ridiculously low. Even if a mon seems passive in the eyes of some people, having a Pokemon like this for 6 makes no sense. I'm sorry. But basically what Bronzong does for this team, it provides you with a Steel type. It provides you with Stealth Rocks. You have another Rocker, you have a third Rocker now, so you don't have to bring Rocks on Tusk. You have another Ground immunity thanks to Levitate. You have a Psychic type. But more importantly, like I said, the main thing to go along with this team is to have more Stealth Rockers to ease the pressure off of Tusk being the go-to Stealth Rocker. And on top of that, Bronzong, like I said, being a Steel type that's immune to ground attacks is very, very good for this team. And it can also be another set-alone sweeper with stuff like Iron Defense, Body Press, Calm Mind, and the like. So it's not by all means passive at any sense of the imagination. So yeah, having a Pokemon, this is another, I guess this would be another example of a value pick as well, especially considering I got Bronzong on this team for 6 points. So I'm not going to complain about having value, utility, rocks, and all that stuff in one Pokemon. So yeah, so we have Bronzong here for round 7, then we have our round 8 pick, which ended up being Goodra, another value pick which I already touched on earlier in the draft, but basically Goodra provides a team with a Dragon, It gives the team other utility, like I said, with knockoff Skull to potentially burn stuff, Dragon Tail for phasing purposes to go along with the Stealth Rock and the Spikes damage, and potential Toxic Spikes damage if you decide to bring Iron Moth in that vein. And it also provides the team with a grass immunity, and considering that we have 3 Pokemon weak to grass with the Tusk, the Samurott, and the T-Tar, we do have 3 resistances, but having the immunity is never a bad thing to have. But on top of that, Gutra does have also good special defense, so it can tank those special hits relatively well, and being a solid water resist without relying solely on Hisuian Samurott to fulfill the role in that regard. So yeah, good value for Gutra for 9 points. Then for round 9, we have more value on this draft, and I picked up Whimsicott for 6 points. And basically the reasoning behind Whimsicott here is aside from the fact that we do have sand, but the main thing is we lack speed, and I didn't want to rely solely on Sand Rush, Houndstone, or Great Tusk after a Rapid Spin to provide that speed. So Whimsicott, while it may look weak, like 77 special attack is not really something to write home about, but it is fast, and it has a lot of utility to provide for a team, aside from being a fairy type, which we finally have one, a grass type, so we have a ground resist, but more importantly, on top of it being fast, it can also function as a prankster, taunt, and encore user, which I talked about earlier in the rules and roles thread. And on top of that, Whimsicott is a prankster user that does not care for dark type Pokemon because it can hit those dark types with a stab, super effective Moonblast. So it works out really well for this team for the speed, the prankster support, and on top of that, it does have the ability to be a fairy type and grass type Pokemon, so it has some useful resistances on top of that. Then for round number 10, 13 points left, I opted to go with Quagsire here for 7 points. More value. Now you might be thinking, there's a Hisuian Samurott on this team, why do you have another water type? So the main reasoning for Quagsire on this build, while Hisuian Samurott can definitely be bulky, can still function as a bulky water, there will be instances where you might not want to be defensive with your Hisuian Samurott, so it's never bad to have a fallback option. Granted, Hisuian Samurott also provides you with spikes. There will be instances as well where you probably cannot bring Hisuian Samurott to certain matchups, so you want to have a fallback option. This, I felt, was the best fallback option available, considering that Quagsire gives you another Stealth Rocker, it gives you a Spiker, another T-Spike user, and on top of that, Unaware is always good to have in the essence of not getting overwhelmed by Shadow Sweepers, so you're not relying on Whimsicott having to come in and like encore them and all that stuff. So like I said, it's not really a bad thing to have in the back, and of course it does give you the option, like I said, to not only have to rely solely on being Hisuian Samurott as your bulky water, it gives you more pressure off of Great Tusk to bring Stealth Rock. So that's the idea behind Quagsire, and with the last pick, 6 points left, and with 1 Pokemon left to go, we have Ambipom here, and the reasoning for Ambipom is, well, it may seem dumb, but the thing is, we needed more speed, and I felt the best Pokemon to have in this situation, considering how the team functioned, was having a fast, normal type Pokemon that can take advantage of all the hazards. Ambipom was the best decision at this point because it was the only fast Pokemon with access to Fake Out, and having means of Fake Out to reliably revenge kill weakened Pokemon is never a bad thing to have with all the hazards we currently have on this draft. So with that being said, that is the team. On to alternative options, and basically when alternative options come up in this particular draft, it's a little bit iffy. So like I said, I already talked about replacing Great Tusk, like assuming Samurott Zapdos, I kind of don't want to touch that. I already talked about if Great Tusk is taken and you want to take Excadrill with the sand, take Excadrill. Iron Moth, I already talked about the replacement, Volcarona. Volcarona also works on this team just to have the ability to just essentially be some sort of sweeper to benefit from the hazards, the Stealth Rock, and the spikes and all that stuff. And you have means of dealing with Heatran because you have Tusk and Samurott, which both outspeed him. Then, obviously, the round 5 and 6 pick is basically, I built the team with sand in mind. On the flip side though, if you really want to, there is an option to go the Sun route, and the Sun route would basically just flip the concept of Moth, T-Tar, and Houndstone, and you would go for something like a Torkoal or Ninetales as your Sun Center, and then your Sun Sweeper to go along with it. You have a few options. Obviously, the main one that would come to mind would be Venusaur, just being a hard-hitting, chlorophyll abusing demon with growth and whatnot. But if you want more value for your points and you want a cheaper option than Venusaur, which is 10 points, for half that you can get Victory Bell. Victory Bell is more or less the same as Venusaur. The only difference between the two Pokemon, Victory Bell is slightly slower. That's really it. It's also not the best defensively stat wise, but having Victory Bell as a Sun Sweeper and saving 5 points, that's a value pick, especially if you're going on the route of Sun. There's also the option if you want to really use like Scovillain as well. I think Scovillain's a little bit higher, but Victory Bell also works in vein of just having something to abuse the Sun. We're still relatively fast by being 70 base speed, but they have the same base special attack at 100. They both get access to Growth, Weather Ball, Grass and Poison Stab. The only other difference is Victory Bell has higher physical attack. So if you want to have a physically sort of way of dealing damage to your opponent's team while abusing the Sun, there is Victory Bell. So there's that taken into consideration. Bronzong, an alternative to Bronzong, there's Earthworm. They both feel the same thing as a Stealth Rocker and a Ground Immunity thanks to Levitate here, Earth Eater for Earthworm there. But if you also want to kind of maintain having some sort of Psychic type Pokemon, I did talk about Mesprit a little bit earlier in the video. Sort of functions the same way, but ideally you want to make sure this is your Steel type for the most part, and Earthworm just felt like the best alternative option to go for with this team. Then for Goodra, other options, I already talked about Dragalge. If you did not get Iron Moth, you got Volcarona. Dragalge is a fine option. Dragon type Pokemon, grounded poison, slow momentum with flip turn, you can't go wrong. If you want a more hard-hitting Pokemon for a Dragon, there's Haxorus. It does cost a bit more points, but it still gives you the ability to be a hard-hitting attacker while still maintaining priority with stuff like First Impression, SD Scale Shot, Dragon Dance, and you still have another means of Taunt. So there's Haxorus to take into account. Whimsicott's a little bit of a iffier one. Like another option you consider, it more so depends on how you draft the rest of your team. But basically this was the speed element of the draft, and there are a few other options to consider if you don't get your Fairy type. If you don't have your Fairy type already, ideally you want to keep Whimsicott on this team for the aforementioned reasons like being fast, the prankster ability and all that stuff. But if you don't get your if you don't get Iron Moth, then you get like Volcarona in this sense, and you don't have Dragalge. Another option to consider that's fast is like something like Salazzle. Granted, having two fire types seems a bit redundant, but if you don't get like Volcarona or a Moth, then you get like a Salamence or some other hard-hitting like wall breaker that can take advantage of your hazards, then you can go the option of Salazzle. Salazzle is a little bit slept upon because like it's not really the first Pokemon you cut things in mind when it comes to like having a fire type, let alone a grounded poison type, but it is fast at base 117 speed. So it has something fast, you have Corrosion Toxic, you get Toxic Spikes, and you have means of dealing with Steel type Pokemon with your Fire Staff. So that's another a bit of a cheaper option. It's a little bit higher price, it's like 10 points here on the draft. And then Quagsire, there's Gastrodon, it's a little bit interchangeable. Gastrodon's a little bit higher in the price department, but regardless, they both fulfill the same role as being a bulky water. Gastrodon's a bit more likely to be can function a little bit better, while Hisuian Samurott can be a bit more physically defensive. You don't want to run Assault Vest or whatnot because that's a relatively low special defense. Especially defensive, Gastrodon does help you, and it still provides you with your rocks, your spikes, recovery, water, bulky water, electric immunity, and the like. So Gastrodon's definitely an option for that. And then lastly, Ambipom. Basically, the idea with Ambipom, any fast normal type Pokemon will do. But like I said, the main reason for Ambipom was for the Technician Fake Out. Other fast normal type Pokemon, so there's stuff like Cinccino to consider. There is Mousehold too, which is a little bit slower and it's a bit weaker. And then of course another option is Zangoose. Or if you want to go even further down the totem pole, well, not really further down, but basically normal type Pokemon, and you don't have the grounded poison, there's Grafaiai. Gives you more prankster support with Encore, Momentum. Grafaiai doesn't get toxic spikes, but it's still a grounded poison, so you still have your utility in that regard. Now then, with that being said, normally this is where I would end the video, but I decided, remember when I said I would go the extra mile? Well, for your guys' viewing pleasure, I made not one, I made two of these teams with this core in mind. This was more weather oriented of a draft. This next one is a little more traditional and standard. And the nice thing about having a team like this, you have good Tera captain options. Main one would be Houndstone to be a sand sweeper and like spam, have more pop behind your Ghost Stab and Poltergeist. And then you have other defensive options too for Tera captains. You have your Bronzong. Whimsicott can be can hit a little bit harder with its Fairy Stab Moonblast. And then defensively you have Bronzong, which can also function pretty well as a defensive mon as well, and still maintain you with some good offensive potential depending on your sets. So with that being said, I'm going to now swap over to the second team that I put together. Be right back. Alright guys, so here we are with the second team regarding this core of Great Tusk, Hisuian Samurott, and Zapdos. This time we're just going the straight non-traditional route here without having any weather or anything other specific factors put into consideration. However, most of the team is pretty similar to the first team with some slight variations that were not on the first team, but I decided to dress a bit more on the second. So first off, round number 4, it's still going to be Iron Moth because you want to have something to take advantage of the hazards set by Great Tusk and Hisuian Samurott, and it seemed like the best choice to have, especially when both of them are pretty pressured by grass type Pokemon like Rillaboom, for example. This time though, round number 5, I decided to go with Archaludon for round number 5. Basically the idea behind Archaludon, first and foremost, I revised the team with another Stealth Rocker, an immediate offensive presence on the special side, and of course it does have a great ability in stamina, so it can constantly tank those physical hits to be aimed they're pretty much aimed at Archaludon. So it's pretty bulky on the physical side. Granted, it is a bit prevalent on the special side, but I did address that with round 6 with Florges, basically here to provide the team with wish support. Archaludon plus Florges is a pretty solid defensive combination just because of the fact that Florges' poison and steel weakness are taken care of by Archaludon. The ground weakness by Archaludon, we have Zapdos as the immunity, and Great Tusk, if EV'd correctly, can honestly take any ground type hit no problem, so long as it is not special. So Florges is just a nice little utility mon with access to wish to keep the Pokemon like Archaludon and Great Tusk healthy. Then round number 7, we have a Zelf here, mainly just due to the fact of having immediate speed, another Stealth Rocker, and it allows the team to be a bit more hyper offensive in nature, which is pretty much what was the idea to go with on this team. You want to have defensive fallback options, but at the same time you don't want to be too defensive to the point where you're pretty much just being reactive to everything. So a Zelf does fit the role here of just being a good suicide lead mon, and like I said, allows the team to be a bit more hyper offensive in nature. Then round number 8, we do have the Decidueye on this team. The Decidueye grants us our ground resist, and more importantly, it does provide the team with a ghost type, so we have the means of rapid spin, a blocking rapid spin. It's going to give more item removal with knockoff, and does get access to good utility like Swords Dance. Can potentially defog in a pinch if you really want to go that route, but ideally, like I said earlier, you don't really want to be trying to go through all the trouble of defogging away your own hazards unless it's absolutely necessary. But yeah, the Decidueye is pretty solid for a round 8 selection. Then we have round 9. We went back to Quagsire again for the other reasons listed for the first team, just having a bulky water, because it's not often that you will be able to bring your Hisuian Samurott in certain matchups, so having a fallback bulky water is always nice, and its weaknesses to grass and its low special defense is covered by the fact that we do have Florges on the team. Then round number 10, more Stealth Rock support. This time I opted for Knuckle Stack. Nothing else really fit the team as far as I'm concerned, but more often than not, Knuckle Stack at the very least provide the team with another Ghost Resist. So stuff like Spectreers and Get Out of Hand, especially considering that Hisuian Samurott is a Ghost Resist that's weak to Fairy, like most Dark type Pokemon. So having a fallback option against something like Spectreer is always nice to have. So Knuckle Stack does work here. And then for 2 points, basically to fulfill the role that Ambipom had left over, I do have Persian on this team. While it's definitely laughed upon in some, just in the sense of it being so ridiculously weak. But the nice thing about Persian, like I said, it sort of fills the same role as Ambipom, of basically just being a fast normal type Pokemon with access to Fake Out, because there was nothing really else for 2 points that you could potentially have put that filled that same role here. But basically, the concept is any fast normal type Pokemon would work. So it doesn't have to be Persian, it can still be Ambipom, it can still be Cinccino, but basically the main reasoning I picked Persian over the other two was basically just I prioritize having priority, which is just nice to have in conjunction with all the hazards. So in terms of alternate options for this, Archaludon, it could be Hisuian Goodra. Hisuian Goodra doesn't get access to Stealth Rock, but it still has some solid utility just from being a bulky Steel and Dragon type Pokemon. And for the most part, Hisuian Goodra is 1 point cheaper on this tier list, and it does allow you to be a bit more bulkier on the special side as well in conjunction with Florges, and with Florges having the ability to pass wishes, that's always nice to have in the back, and does provide the team with a grass immunity. Then for Florges, alternative option is Sylveon for wish support, but Sylveon is a bit more higher price because of Pixelate. It's a bit more of an offensive fairy thanks to Pixelate. For a lesser option, if you don't really care much for wish, there is Diancie, which also fits the role of Stealth Rocker, additional Spiker, and multifaceted in other forms as well, which are free at the Knuckle Stack slot as well. But regardless, even less so if you don't want to go Florges, you could do Dash Bun for a bit of a cheaper option for a Wish Passer if you really want to, but I did value Florges basically considering the fact that it's a Wish Passer with a relatively good special defense stat, so having a special tank is definitely more appreciated on a team like this. Azelf could easily be Mesprit for just having a bulky Psychic type Pokemon if you don't want to go the hyper offensive route, but Azelf just works so well here because of the fact that it's basically you want something faster than 110 speed. Azelf fits that route. Another option, considering that this team does have multiple Stealth Rocking options instead of Azelf, you could do Cresselia. Basically, fat Psychic with the ability to be a bit more of a support mon with access to Thunder Wave, Lunar Dance to heal up your sweepers. So you do have some multitudes of ways of going around that. Even going the route of Slowking and making Slowking a bulky water to free up Hisuian Samurott. This gives you Chilly Reception support. So if you want to go that route with having like Slowking and then getting like some sort of Slush Rust sweeper, maybe like a Titan, for example, a Alolan Sand Slash, something along those lines that can take advantage of the Snow Step by Slowking, then that's also another option as well. Decidueye, another option over Decidueye, there's Brambleghast, which is both being a ghost and a grass type in one. Brambleghast gives you additional spike support, and I know some people absolutely love that thing, in conjunction with Wind Rider, so you do have a flying immunity if you really want to get cheeky. But Brambleghast is also a solid option for that. Another option, if you really want to go cheaper in the grass ghost department, there is Trevenant, which some people don't think about, but basically Trevenant does provide a team with a similar grass and ghost stab, but on top of that, it does have access to stuff like harvest, so subseed sets are pretty annoying, and even more so natural cure, so you never have to worry about being so you're a physical attacker that doesn't care much about status. Is basically the idea behind that. Quagsire, there's Gastrodon, I already talked about that earlier. And then the main thing for Knuckle Stack here is basically it's having another option. If you don't get Quagsire or Gastrodon and you go for something else, the other option over Knuckle Stack, albeit it's a lot more niche of a water ground type, there is Wishcash, which is also frowned upon because it's relatively cheap for 3 points, but basically Wishcash is a Stealth Rocker, it's a Spiker, and it's a Dragon Dance user, so you have an ability to be like Stealth Rock or Spikes and DD. It's fairly bulky despite its middling stats. It's actually bulkier than you think, and with a Pokemon with only one weakness to grass, it's actually pretty decent for low value for 3 points. And then lastly, I already talked about Persian. Persian can be Ambipom, Cinccino, Mousehold, even Zangoose, but basically any hard-hitting normal type Pokemon would definitely benefit in the last slot here, especially considering that this team has so much ways of setting up hazards on this draft. So with that being said, that is going to be episode number 3 of how to draft in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the Indigo Disk. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was definitely a time-consuming project to put together these mons, these slides, and making sure the team fit through all the roles that I had mentioned. I will leave timestamps in the description, so if you guys want to skip to a particular point in the video, whether it be the value picks and Tera captains, the first team, the second team, whatever, there will be links there. I'll leave those timestamps in the description for you guys so you can just skip to that point in the video. But regardless of that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video nonetheless. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like, drop a comment, let me guys know what you think about the team, what other suggestions you would like me to address in future videos, and give your own feedback on what you would do if you had the core of Great Tusk, Hisuian Samurott, and Zapdos. I really do appreciate you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. And of course, this is my first video going up on my channel since I hit 300 subscribers, which is something I never thought I'd actually be saying at this point in my YouTubing career or draft league in general. Considering I've been doing this for so long, I'm definitely grateful to all the people that I've gotten to know over the years, and to you, the viewers. I cannot thank you guys enough for your support. But regardless, I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to get all sappy and sentimental with you guys, but regardless, thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more videos. And until the next time, guys, this is Tone, signing out for now. Peace out.